On the morning of December 16, 1972, several hundred women gathered at Columbia University to participate in a lesbian feminist dialogue. The first speaker was Florence Rush, a member of New York Radical Feminists, whose subject was the relationship of feminism to lesbianism.
My name is Florence Rush, and it's kind of early in the morning for a story, but I'm going to tell a story anyway. And the name of my story is called The Parable of the Mothers and Daughters. Many years ago, when the world was new, there were rivers, trees, birds, animals, and people. The people looked very much alike, except for some small differences which no one noticed. And sometimes some bore and gave birth to little people. They all hunted and gathered food, played in the water among the plants, with each other and each other's bodies, and all the big people took care of the little ones. When more food was hunted and gathered than was needed for each day, the people used the extra time differently. They used the extra time differently. One who liked music would sing or make sounds with sticks and shells, while another made pictures of birds on a smooth rock. Even a little person had differences, and if she, everyone was she in those days, also loved music and chose to be with a music lover, the big music lover then cared for the little one. So people had different preferences and choices. Each could decide what to do with her time, who to spend it with. And each had control and power over her own life, and that was very good. Later, when many little people were born, it became difficult to hunt and gather and care for them. So the little ones were cared for in one place. This work was equally shared, but soon someone suggested that those with breasts were better able to feed the little ones and should do the entire job. The breast people welcomed this change. Free from hunting and gathering, they could look around at their world for a better way to live. Some planted seeds and grew food. Animal fur was made into cloth. They built houses, made tools. And before long, they became artists and inventors. But one day, the breastless ones noticed that the breast people were growing so much food that hunting and gathering was no longer necessary. Furthermore, the separation made it obvious that the breast people bore and gave birth to little ones. The breast people were very happy to share everything with everyone and would have been delighted to have the breastless ones bear and give birth to the babies. But this could not be shared, and this was the only natural difference between them. But this difference and the amazing progress of the breast people so startled and frightened the breastless ones that they pondered for a way to overcome this fear. So the breastless ones contrived to have control over those they feared, and they committed the first crime. They took possession of the lives of the breastless people, the little ones, robbed them of all they created and produced, and made them their slaves. This crime was known as marriage. And from then on, the breastless ones were known as males and the breast people females. With no excuse for this behavior, the males invented lies to justify their crime. Males are superior to the females, they said. The females didn't believe the lies. They hated captivity. They fought, they ran away, they even killed the males. But when resistance continued, the males wrote their lies in books, and these books became the Bible, the Koran, and the texts of Hinduism. To be assured of their power, what was written became law, and those who broke the law were punished. So the right of the males to enslave the females became legal. And from then on, the males were men and the females women. Soon all the women were married. They no longer tried to run away, and some even believed what was written. Often several women were married to one man, and together they harvested the food, washed clothing in the river, and cared for the children. But since the wives did not enslave each other, they were very happy together. When the men saw this happiness, they remembered when the women were strong and again were afraid. And this time they wrote in their books that women must hate, fight, and betray each other for the favor of men. So the women were made to believe that love between them was not possible. Later, these books became the foundation of civilizations. And it then became the mother's duty to raise her son to feel superior and her daughter to feel inferior. And this was called socialization. At the risk of punishment or disgrace, the mothers were compelled to train their daughters as slaves, and they could not permit them to be inventive or artistic, but only to carry heavy burdens, submit to the sexual lust of men, and bear and rear children. When the daughters were young and their spirits strong, they fought their mothers and ran away, but the fathers would catch them and send them back to be socialized. But the mothers and daughters knew that each was forced into slavery, and when they were not struggling, they were friends. The mothers protected their daughters as best they could from rape and abuse. And the daughters danced and gave their mothers flowers, and their friendship was their only source of pleasure and strength. But again jealous, the men this time demeaned the love of the mothers and daughters. They described it as a strange female compulsion and called it devotion and self-sacrifice. And if women were not devoted and self-sacrificing, the men said that they would suffer from a terrible malady called guilt. So with the terrible threat of guilt, love between the mothers and daughters became a burden. And now the men controlled not only the lives of women, but their feelings as well. There was no more pleasure for the mothers and daughters. At times they complained, but were told that if they suffered in silence, they would be rewarded in heaven. So because they quietly endured, some men thought the women enjoyed this condition, and they called them lovers of pain or masochists. The men were now truly different from the women. They never knew the joy of love or the pain of guilt. Their pleasure was only in power, and their sorrow only from the loss of it. Power made them feel so good and strong that fathers and sons began to battle each other. And the winner took his prize of land, cattle, women, and other men. But the lives of the women were unbearably empty, so sometimes they fought each other, hoping also to gain some pleasure from power. But the women had nothing to win from each other, neither land nor wealth. They did not even own their own lives. Men never interfered when women fought, because it comforted them to see women divided. When it suited the men, they were friendly to one another. But when they wanted power, they fought. But when they fought, they killed. And when they killed, they were rewarded with more wealth and power. And although one man lost and another gained, even the poorest and lowliest man alive always had power over some woman. The power of men grew, and soon institutions evolved to support them. And the church, family, and schools established that the inferiority of women was truth and the oppression of women was just. Soon the people no longer lived off the land, but they lived by what was produced by machines. They followed the machines to cities, and families were reduced from many wives and relatives to a husband, wife, and children. No longer bound to the land, people thought of freedom and wealth, and some men became very rich. But now the lone woman in the family did all the family work and also worked on the machines. There was talk of liberty and democracy, and some women listened, thought of their own freedom, and just as their hopes were raised a little, a physician appeared and told the world that women were biologically inferior and naturally meant for slavery. Fathers and sons fought for the mother, he said, but the son soon learned that the mother wasn't worth the struggle, so he allied himself to the father. So the daughter also turned to her father. But since she could never be a man, she could only despise the mother who deprived her of a penis, marry, have a baby instead of a penis, and accept her condition of slavery. So the superior fathers and sons either got along or understandably competed for masculine power, while the inferior mothers and daughters hated themselves and each other and were forever afflicted by their female deficiencies. This was also written in books and believed by all, even by the mothers and daughters. Then men became very greedy. They made terrible wars. They built bigger machines and began to foul and destroy the earth. The hierarchies of power were getting out of hand. The institutions were crumbling. And since women's inferiority was firmly established, it was very easy to blame them for this devastation. Men plundered and destroyed. But when children sickened themselves with drugs and the streets were made unsafe by rape, mugging, and killing, and people were weary from a life without purpose, a group of wise men called psychologists found the source of disturbance in women, particularly in mothers. Then there were some women who, filled with anger by the injustice of the world, fought to free men from war and racial injustice. But no matter how hard they struggled, the men made speeches while the women were sent to the kitchen. And the women knew they were despised. Aware that they gained nothing in the cause of men, they formed a movement in their own cause. The women began to talk and trust each other. They discovered that they were strong, even stronger than men, that they were smart, even smarter than men, that they had capacity for deep feelings, whereas men confused sexual urges with emotions. Now women wanted control over their own lives. But the men resisted. They fought, ridiculed, and humiliated the women, called them man and child haters, dykes, destroyers of the family and motherhood, and spread their venom by their instruments of communication. How to obtain power became a prime problem, but it was soon clear that women, so long separated and divided by men according to male class, money, and status, came to the movement with a variety of experiences, and this led to differences of opinion. Some women claimed that the institution of oppression must be internally changed. Others said they must be attacked from without. Some felt all relationships with men must be discontinued. Others thought one must live with men and challenge and undermine their power. Some turned from motherhood while others wanted to raise children. Many claimed that lesbianism was the only real commitment to feminist revolution, while others wanted to hide this preference and not offend those who fear the love of women for each other. Some advocated socialism, some anarchism, and so on. The women did not agree. So with the weight of the centuries of patriarchal power upon them, they began to quarrel. And they said one to the other, "You are my oppressor." But the technique to keep women apart is told in all the books written by men, and it is told in the parable of the mothers and daughters. Long ago, the mothers were forced to press their daughters into slavery. But in recent days, the practice continues for fear of social scorn or exclusion. And although the rebellious daughter is no longer captured, she is so infused with the lies of her inferiority and so stripped of all confidence that force is no longer needed to prevent her independence. So a woman of 22, unsure of her strength, yet wanting freedom, blames her mother and is immobilized. And a woman of 50 or 60 still blames her mother for the bitterness and frustration of her life. And this very same woman agonizes over the antagonism between herself and her daughter. But were the mothers to turn from their mother role and the daughters their daughter role, both could see that it is the world of men which molds all women into slaves, that the institutions and machinery of communication can more thoroughly control the daughters than any mother. The desire of the daughter to be slender and attractive will be instilled whether mothers train their daughters to this end or not. And since daughters are doomed never to be slender or attractive enough, so are the mothers doomed to be forever blamed. So in this conflict, devoid of any gratification or victory, mothers and daughters are forever trapped. But if the mothers and daughters could walk away, leave each other, and stop blaming one another, then surely both could see that neither have the power nor control over each other, but the power which deprives them of freedom stems from men. The parable of the mothers and daughters is our story, and it is our conflict. Our struggle with each other betrays our submission to the rule of men. We have no way to control each other's lives or behavior. Yet, with the illusion of power, we also quarrel, but without gratification or victory. And do we really know what is right or wrong, good or bad for each other? Do we, women, have our own ethics, standards, and ideology? Or are we floundering to be feminists within a framework of male definition? What is this power we seek, when the only power we know is described by patriarchs? And let us think what power can be in feminist terms. What would power mean in a world free of force and coercion? What could love be without a trace of devotion, sacrifice, and guilt? What could sex mean, uncorrupted by power, fear, and manipulation? We have so much to discover, and it may be that our difference will be our strength, and the effort to protect each woman's right to be different, our greatest unifying force. And this right can be for us all. Lesbians, celibates, bisexual, asexual, Amazon virgins, heterosexual, for housewives, mothers, laborers, engineers, doctors, plumbers, artists, women of all ages and races, from all places, whatever they are or want to be. The mothers and the daughters have suffered long enough at each other's hands, as have all women. So if the mothers and daughters do not agree, let them not agree, but let them leave each other each to find her own way. And if women do not agree, let them not agree. And if they must, let them also leave each other. And the strength of women will be in each of us. And from our variety will come our feminist thinking. And all the old ways will be challenged. And all the old concepts will be redefined. And from our difference, our variety, and our feminism will come our strength. And with this strength, we will battle our only oppressor, men.
Next, we hear Jan Peterson, also a longtime member of New York Radical Feminists.
My name is Jan Peterson, and I'm following up Florence's paper because it summarizes, in case in point, my own philosophy on the women's movement. I decided that I'm a nervous wreck, because how can you follow such a beautiful paper as that? And I've been reading her paper for the last 2 weeks and trying to think of what I was going to say, and every time I'd read it, I'd try to decide there has to be something missing someplace, and I can't find it. I personally find the entire conflict between gay and straight women in the movement as both sad and ironic. I think it's sad personally because I felt torn apart inside in a way that I've never been since I came into the movement. I've heard the views and pain of gay women who have felt discriminated against in a movement where they came to find freedom and liberation, where they thought that that there would finally be an atmosphere of a place where they could come out and be themselves and be accepted. I've heard straight women feeling that they're being held in question on their feminism because they sleep with men, that somehow who they sleep with determines their merit as feminists. Both groups, I believe, both groups are legitimate in their point of view. These kind of vibrations, which I guess is a case in point right here, these kind of vibrations have been given in the movement. And I think it's this point that we should analyze today is how did we get to this point, that these kind of feelings are coming about in the movement. I think that one of the main tenets of the women's movement is the fact that it's the one place that all of us came for the first time to find a place that we could be ourselves. In fact, almost the first comment all of us made is, hey, we're really not crazy after all. And with that ensuing relief, and I can remember it, I remember the first consciousness-raising group that I sat in the first hour, like my whole life at that particular point came into focus, like all the struggles that I had made for the 27 years of my existence up to that time was not totally in vain, that I was really okay, it was the world out there. All of us came because we had a lot of similarities in coming. I think one of the problems is that we forgot that we had a lot of differences in coming. Each of us came with different primary agendas in our mind. And I think initially, in fact, you can remember from consciousness-raising groups, is that for the first number of months there's a real high because you sit around and you find out, hey, that one, look, oh, that's in common. They feel the same way. And all of a sudden there becomes a point in consciousness-raising that you start hearing the differences. And I understand that a lot of consciousness-raising groups have fallen apart at that point. And I think because we don't understand that the movement is not, first of all, is not going to be an all commonality. It's going to have a lot of differences. It's going to have a lot of anxiety brought up. And the fact is that all of us, one of the biggest reasons why we're here and why we're in consciousness-raising, why many of us spent hours and hours of consciousness-raising, is to try to make connections with each other. For 2,000 years, women have been divided. What Florence is talking about, that systematic attempt to divide women from each other, did take place. That means that not overnight, there is no way overnight that we are going to be able to relate to each other, that there's going to be struggles within the movement, within our consciousness-raising groups, with our friends. That has to happen, and that has to be one of the primary parts that are there. I mean, we have just too many things for too long that have made us different. I remember one of the first times, I think that, and probably a lot of you remember, is that I think the second women's conference was the first time an overt group came in to say that a whole other group in the movement, that there was something wrong with them. And I think it was SWP women, or it was a whole group of women that came to the conference and told all the so-called middle-class women that they were really shit because they were oppressing working-class and poor women. I don't know if many of you remember that. But at that conference, that was the first time it became to be like polarization took place at meeting. And it wasn't what was being said, if you remember. I mean, it wasn't what was being said, because obviously all of us want to be able to deal with the different interests that women have, but it was how it was being said. A group of women got up and said to all of us, because I felt the same thing, you are really shit, you're oppressive to other women. And here we were feeling so oppressed and feeling so powerless and not knowing what to do, that there began to be a reaction in the audience. And I want to point out the difference of how another group handled the same kind of thing. And that was when the Lavender Menace group came to the second women's conference. I thought that was one of the most beautiful, and I won't call it a confrontation, I don't know what you want to call it. I think that's feminist politics that took place at that second women's conference. A group of women got up in front of the room and said, hey, we don't want to talk about necessarily what the conference is dealing with. We think that there's some things you got to find out. There's a whole group of us that are in the movement that you're not dealing with, and we're going to come out, and we think that there's some things you better learn to understand about us. They didn't say to the straight women, because nobody knew that they were straight or what they were at that time. They didn't say to the straight women, look, you're all bad. You know, you can't understand. You're all oppressing us. They said, you're oppressing us in a way that you don't understand, and I think we want to really sit down and talk to you about it. In fact is that whole entire conference switched over. I remember that everybody went up to a room and sat at least hours and hours talking about women loving women, what gay women felt, how they felt oppressed by straight women, and the dialogue was really high. And in fact, as we've had almost every conference I've been to since then, the Women Loving Women workshop has been the most popularly attended and the largest. And I think it was because of the style of how it was offered that I think that we have to form a new way of handling differences in the movement. It was later, it was during the March meetings where some different kinds of things happened. And a lot of it was because there were some women in the movement, some so-called leaders, and this is always our problem with the leaderless structure, we have leaders, there began to be a lot of dialogue in the newspapers by so-called straight women that were heads of large organizations that for some reason didn't want the women's movement to become too identified with the gay movement. They felt that somehow if the women's movement got identified with the gay movement, that it would be just one more title that would be added that would make us less acceptable. And it was that the press began to pick that up. A lot of us read the press, and I think that for many gay women within NOW and radical feminists went underground. And I think that gay women that were not feminists at all began to feel in reaction to the women's movement. And the feeling began to build up, and dialogue did not take place at that point. And I think at the March meetings, what happened is that the pressure had built up to such a point that we began to fall into the old confrontation politics. And what happened is that a number of gay women came in and said, all of you straight women are shit. You've been oppressing us. Straight women said, what do you mean we're shit? You know, and it began to be this kind of confrontation, and polarization took place. And I think that this is one of the biggest problems that are going on in the women's movement. I don't think it's just between gay and straight, by the way. I think black women this has happened with black women and white women, Spanish women, poor working class women. I've heard it from a lot of working class women and middle class women, that somehow we think that the way to increase the orientation of the women's movement is through confrontation politics. The other point that I want to make is that I think the sexual is political. I think that we have been denied our sexuality for the last 1,000 years, that somehow it's our potency that is at issue. I think that men, that it's not whether we're gay or straight or bisexual or asexual or whatever it is. I think it's the potency of women. And I think if we don't deal with that issue, that men right now are going into therapy in huge numbers because they're fearful of their impotency, that for years they've been able to use sex as a power dynamic, that we're underestimating our own power. And I think that for every woman to begin to come in touch with her own sexuality is another way that we are breaking down the power institutions that men have used to control us. And I think so that if women begin to start denying the potency of other women, it's going to be just as bad as men doing it to us. This is the first time, by the way, I've written notes, and every time I'm speaking, I have no idea where I am in the notes. I'm going to just end with a personal statement. I think that many women come into the movement trying to figure out their relationships to other women. Personally, myself, I came in as I would say, a male-identified woman, and that meant that most of my friends were men. I totally related to men up until the women's movement. In 3 years, I've gone through such changes from that orientation to loving women to dealing with I have no idea who I relate to sexually anymore. I know that everybody seems to be turning me on. Somebody got very upset when I described myself as fuzzy. I won't use that term anymore, but I really refuse to take a label, because I can't find a label that I feel comfortable with. And I think that labels is another way to divide us from each other. And I want to add on that is that at the same time that I'm saying I'm anti-label, I really understand the necessity of the gay movement to bring out into the open the problems of gayness. And I really understand that. And I think it's a double dichotomy, because I think that we have a whole sexual orientation that's been denied in a society. At the same time, we have a women's movement that is trying to allow differences for women, and I think those two run in conflict with each other, the two needs. And I think that that's where the sensitivity is going to have to take place. For me, it's oppressive to have to label myself, because I don't know. I feel that I love human beings, and I really feel good about that. I feel like I've made a whole lot of transition. And I think that for almost every woman in this room, the biggest thing they're dealing with is their relationships with other women. And we're not going to get it through confrontation. I know the minute somebody says, I've got to be a certain way, I go back into the way I've had to live all the time, as I say, no, I don't have to be a certain way. I'm going to be me. And the last point I want to read is a thing from Ingrid Bengus, if anybody's seen MS. She says, if Victorian society decreed that sex for women was taboo, and enlightened society decreed that women were entitled to as much sex as men were, liberated society has decreed that sex and even exclusive love are oppressive to women. Suddenly I want to scream, for God's sake, just stop. Let me off this idiot merry-go-round. My psyche is not an ideological playground. My inner feelings at their most genuine are not ruled by social decree. You can have 1,000 lovers if you want, or have none. You can be a lesbian, a virgin, a career woman, a mother of all four, or all four. But don't tell me who I am or what's best for me to be. I recognize parts of myself when you speak of women, but other parts don't fit the formula. I recognize parts of males I know when you speak of men, but other parts defy categorization. I can't make the transition required to fit the current theories of the age. Especially the ages are so telescoped that one barely has time to absorb one set of perspectives before another is all the rage. I don't know who women are. I scarcely even know who I am, and that's what I feel, by the way. I want the chance, I really, literally, personally want the chance to find out who I am, because I don't think any of us know. We're in a state of evolution. I feel like I was born 3 years ago, and I think that for most of us we were. We don't know who we're going to become, and I want the right to become me.
We represent a group of lesbians who choose not to participate in this conference. Although we respect the right of the lesbians here to participate in this conference, it does not, as the title implies, represent all lesbians. It is essential that it be understood by all women that the views that might be expressed here by lesbians are not the views of all lesbians. For instance, the following groups of lesbians have not been given room at this conference. Lesbians who see the enemy as heterosexism because there is no heterosexism workshop. Lesbians who relate only to lesbians because there are straight women here. Third world lesbians who would relate only to a third world workshop because there is no workshop. Working class and poor lesbians who would want to relate to a workshop with each other because there is no workshop. Lesbian mothers because there was no child care listed on the flyer. Lesbian mothers who needed a workshop with other lesbian mothers because there is no workshop. Poor lesbians who could not afford the registration price and who aren't familiar enough with the women's movement to know that they might have been able to get in for free. Lesbians who do not, in their daily lives, go to the places where the flyer was distributed. For instance, college campuses and women's centers. Lesbians who relate only sexually and socially to women were not given the option of attending this conference because the flyers were not distributed at places in the city where lesbians are known to congregate socially. The Latin lesbians who could not read the flyer. Lesbians who need room to have workshops that the planners did not think of because the flyer did not advertise empty classrooms to fill those needs. There is no explanation, rationale, or excuse that the organizers of this conference can give that will satisfy the charges that we are bringing against it. We, the lesbians who have been excluded from this conference, and the lesbians who are not here, charge that the organizers of this conference have misused their class privileges. We assert that this conference will be directed, as it already has, as evidenced by the flyer, to white, middle-class, educated women's libbers, by power-tripping white, middle-class, educated women's lib careerists. Therefore, in the names of our sisters, lesbian mothers, poor, working class, third world, old gay sisters, we are demanding a public apology from the perpetrators of this reactionary elitist event.
Thanks.
Martha Shelley, a longtime feminist and gay activist, replied briefly to the Richmond College women.
Okay, I've been to I don't know how many conferences in the last 5 years, and I don't remember any conference that, was publicized to the extent that everybody wanted it publicized, that included absolutely everybody, and that met all of the criteria for everybody. And lately, an awful lot of them have been happening without child care. Well, the only category that I fall into that was on that leaflet is being a poor lesbian because I'm a welfare recipient. Okay, I happen to be an educated lesbian too, but I thought the purpose of this conference was to try to, to start dealing with the fact that we've been divided by labels and not to continue to reinforce the whole thing. And it's true we can't cover everybody, But this place can be a start to reach out to more people, and we can start learning how to reach out instead of denouncing everybody because they didn't do everything first.
Great. The second half of the morning was devoted to the gay view of feminism. First, a dyke separatist, whose name unfortunately I don't have. Her choice not to read her original paper, I think, was indicative of where things were going. In other words, there were to be no aggressive ideological statements of difference, but rather simple statements of where I'm at and let's get together.
Well, I wrote a paper today that I was going to give, and I don't really want to do the whole thing because I think that in some ways the dyke separatist position is not an ideological place. I feel more that it's a tactical sort of place where criticism is coming from. I think that the dyke separatists are functioning as a conscience within the movement. I believe that the dyke separatists are within the feminist movement and that they're really alienated people. I myself don't really have any straight friends. And I work with only dykes. It sort of happened that way. You know, I was kind of lucky because we really understand each other. My dyke separatism is not getting hit on the street particularly. I don't go around, I try to be invisible on the street so I don't catch a lot of shit. But I'd like to read what I think from the paper I wrote is a constructive sort of criticism that I've heard other women who call themselves dyke separatists say. Number one, we find sexual social relationships with men politically untenable. Labeling men people in order to continue your involvement with them is hypocritical. Two, the personal ideological accommodations within feminism to the heterosexist institution have corroded our belief in the strength of the movement to make a real revolution. The feminist movement is in danger of being neutralized by legal reform and male participation. We have experienced great pain in relationships with straight identified women to whom we have been open in the spirit of sisterhood. We have been humiliated and objectified sexually. We have been accused of cruising every straight woman we see, while we have had to suppress our natural responses to the conscious and or unconscious seductiveness of these women. We see in the feminist movement very little willingness to build women's counter-institutions, to withdraw support from men and to direct it towards women, because women are losers, or we have been until now. I think as I said, the lesbian has been a conscience within the movement, and it's a mistake for straight women to put lesbians down, and I think it's suicidal for lesbians to renounce feminism.
The next speaker is Jill Johnston, columnist for the Village Voice, who was instrumental in organizing the conference.
I'm attempting to criticize everybody and offer some unrealistic idealism. Yeah, I'm Sadie von Maslach. First or second off, I'm into thinking we're all in these different places, in as many places as we are women. So I ask myself when I meet this one or that one, where is them politically, sexually, and where is one in relation to this one or me, or where am I now sexually, politically, since I'm not the me I was yesterday or last year, and where are we going, or am I already ahead of myself or behind? And is somebody else slightly behind or ahead of that, and if not, then what, or what anything? I mean, how should we behave, and where should we think, or what are we permitted to assume, much less concerning anybody else, their total life, their total past? Who are they? Who am I? Who am I to them to become, if anything, and so on? Like, is the one I'm talking to about to sleep with a woman for the first time, in which case would I cause her not to if I accused her of oppressing me by sleeping with a man? And if she does anyway, will she then be terrified to think she might be thought a lesbian? And if so, should we condemn her by thinking what we were all brought up all these centuries to actually think? Although we now think we're so smart just because a few of us know it's great and know it isn't bad, and know that makes us, in fact, the ultimate feminist, etc. I mean, we think we're really hot shit, and we are, and so... And so what is that going to do for us when so many women are still so scared? The question is, do we want more of us, or do we want to just go around saying what hot shit we are? And how you straight women are lousing us up just to make sure they'll go on doing it. And if so, how long would it take before the women called lesbians reemerge as a special interest group? And how long after that before you can't say the word lesbian at all anymore, as if there is such a thing as a lesbian? The thing is, the more I say it, the more I feel it doesn't exist. Although I have to go on saying it to make sure anybody knows I'm defining myself politically as a woman-committed woman. And the word feminist to me doesn't totally convey that idea, since so many feminists advocate a change in our situation in relation to the man rather than the devotion of our energies to our own kind, to women. I have to ask, does this make us enemies when we all are potentially dedicated to ourselves, and we are, in a sense, all the women we ever were, including straight, possibly? Just yesterday or last year or the last time I slept with a man 2 years ago, or 4 years before that in a tenement on Houston Street with 2 kids, still thinking I was straight, and I was, even though I was in love with a woman. I still am that woman I am, all the women I ever was, which is all the women of the world in transition. I become more completely a lesbian or a woman-committed woman as the centuries pass, and more of me become me, or the me I think it's such hot shit to be, which it is, by which I mean a woman. The more I sleep with myself and eat myself and write myself and breathe myself, the more woman I become the woman myself I am who I sleep with. It doesn't mean you're not a lesbian if you never slept with a woman before, if you consider the person you sleep with the most is yourself. And that's you, a woman. From this point of view, we're all lesbians right from the start, although what we are and what we think or say we are can be altogether different things. It doesn't matter, even by the sights of advanced ideology. You can't demand that people be where they're not yet ready to be. Even if you say all persuasive and important, listen, a woman committed to herself, meaning a woman as combined image of mother, daughter, sister, is absolutely at odds with society, which has been in the modern Western world organized around the principle of heterosexuality, which in effect means the prime commitment of woman to man who is committed to himself. Or saying it another way, if you say what I really mean when I say you're oppressing me when you sleep with a man, is that you're giving something so vital to the man in the sense is the same as withholding it from me, your daughter, your sister, or how in effect you go to bed with my brother by paying him more attention. You deprive me in proportion as you do so is all very good logic, possibly, especially when we can say furthermore, look, you who have for centuries given your best services to your sons, what in the end have the sons done for us, if not to persuade us or coerce us to serve more sons? Okay, and go on and say and look around you, do you see any lesbians becoming straight, and so on. No matter what we say, we can't very well demand what anybody isn't ready to give, who may in fact be ready to change tomorrow or next year, who may know a lot more in advance of her current opportunities or her present practical situation or emotional readiness, or who may be putting her life in order to make big changes we don't know about anyway, who probably won't be significantly impressed by anything so much as the example of our own togetherness. All of which doesn't alter, it's true, the social fact that the very women we wait for continue to hurt us by damning us or ignoring us or hating us or tolerating us for loving ourselves, or oppressing us by objectifying us as potential lesbian experiences, or projecting onto us the sexism and puritanism and chauvinism of their own expectations of all they've known in relation to the man. We won't stop them from doing this by accusing them of it or by objectifying them in turn, by, say, making any woman a princess or an all-purpose mommy, or even necessarily by carrying on about how when you saw me at that party and said, so you have breasts, what you meant was, so you're a woman after all. like a guy saying to a faggot in a locker room, you really do have balls, as though a lesbian committed woman is less than a woman or somehow a male for liking other women, the way males do supposedly, and thus being less a woman, not being a woman in the sisterhood of man-pandering females. Or when you say, oh, I happen to love a woman now, but I could as well have a relationship with a man if he were the right sort of person, as though we were not all persons before the feminists taught us we were women, in the sense of being a political class, in which case what you're really saying is if the right sort of man came along. Or when you say if all else fails, we'll try loving our sisters, even if you do think you mean just sex, I translate it to mean loving your sisters, which means sex and everything. I still know the truth is demonstrable only by example, and the only way to proceed historically is to respect personal places, even while asserting the logic and example of our own. In this way, enough women, by a few centuries' time, will become the hot shit we think we are to make a viable Amazon nation or tribe or tribes of women capable of sustaining themselves independently of the male species. We have to remind ourselves that in 1972 in America we are a fugitive band who can't afford to isolate ourselves from the woman in the middle. If we don't see common cause with feminists, feminists are not likely to see it with us either, especially when it's so easy to find reason by offense to say we have nothing to do with you when it's still so scary to proclaim the legitimacy of an identity so recently criminal. Do I have time to read this? Yeah. Oh. I had this was a statement made a while ago by Lesbians International. Lesbians International came out in favor of feminist rights. Whereas, because she defines herself in relation to men, the straight feminist is considered unnatural, incomplete, not quite a woman, as though the essence of womanhood were to be identified with women. And whereas feminists were never excluded from Lesbians International, but we have been evasive or apologetic about their presence within the organization. Afraid of encouraging public, i.e. male, support, we have often treated feminists as the stepsisters of the movement, allowed them to work with us, but then expected them to hide in the upstairs closet when the company comes. Asking women to disguise their identities so they will not embarrass the group is an intolerable form of oppression, like asking white women to join us in blackface. Lesbians International must reassess the priorities that sacrifice principles to image. Whereas we are affected by society's prejudices against the heterosexual woman, whether we acknowledge it or not, as lesbians we are all subject to straight baiting by opponents who use the tactic of labeling us the worst thing they can think of, heterosexual, in order to divide and discredit the movement and bring women to heel. Even within Lesbians International, this tactic has been employed by some members who insist that feminists are a special interest group whose primary concern is men. Lesbians International is inevitably weakened by these attempts to undermine the spirit and efforts of its members. We can no longer afford to ignore the problem. Therefore, be it resolved that Lesbians International recognizes feminism as a lesbian issue.
Next, Ruth Simpson, an unofficial speaker and a past president of Daughters of Bilitis, an early lesbian organization which preceded most feminist groups and which was dissolved by the ideological splits and infighting of the last couple of years.
I'm Ruth Simpson. I'm a past... Here, back up. Okay? I'm a past president of Daughters of Bilitis. You may remember that group. The disruptors will be back, I'm sure, because this is what happens when we're dealing with the pathology of women. There will always be the disruptors. There will always be those who want to separate themselves off, calling themselves revolutionaries. And I would like to say that a lot of allegedly revolutionary action is dreadfully counter-revolutionary when it is analyzed. And I would like to deal with what I consider a very peripheral and almost minuscule approach to some of these counter-revolutionaries. They deal in rhetoric, the whole dyke thing. I would like to ask feminists, recently I saw a pamphlet on how to be a healthy dyke. That to me is like a feminist group spending time saying how to be a healthy broad, or blacks saying how to be healthy niggers, or Jews how to be healthy kikes. And why spend time spinning wheels, taking on labels that don't mean a goddamn thing anyway? Bulldagger goes way back, it means a mean, nasty butch. And what we have to remember about homosexuality, if you want to think about it, homo does not come from the Latin man. It comes from the Greek homos, meaning the same. And we are women. I am a lesbian. I've never had problems about it. I've always been happy about it. I've never been in therapy. And when I have, that is not a healthy dyke because I don't consider myself into any sort of role-playing. And as I say, this is peripheral, it's insignificant, but a lot of people are spinning a lot of wheels talking about how to be a healthy dyke, when actually we should be out in the streets, we should be getting the laws off the books which make us illegal, we should work with whomever we can find who will work with us, and stop cutting across boundaries saying, I will do this, I will not do this. Let's all be women together. Let's all somehow, somewhere, sometime learn to love each other as the same. And let's stop the role play, the disruption, and let's get on with our work.
Thank you, Ruth. Now, in response to that particular problem, Deborah.
My name is Deborah Glick. In response to that, Ruth, the use of words such as dyke or butch or femme is an attempt to reclaim words so that they can't be used against us. If I wear a button that says dyke, some man on the street, when he sees me with my woman friend, my lover, can't call me a dyke because I've already said that that's what I am. And it's just a matter of taking away words that have been used to hurt us, keep us down, keep us in the closet. You take them, you wear them out front, you come out, and you don't let anybody put you down.
Okay. Thank you. Next person. We have about 10 more minutes. 15, okay? 15 more minutes. Anybody who wants more responses?
Hi, my name is Jackie Early, and I have a poem I'd like to read because basically that's how I express myself, through poetry. But first of all, before I read the poem, I would like to repeat a few words of one of my favorite women. She stood up many years ago and she said, I think where there's so much fussing and carrying on, there must be something out of kilter. Now I think betwixt the white women of this country and the black women of this country that we can get it together. Now they say that a man is supposed to support you and lift you over ditches and help you into carriages and give you the best of places everywhere. Well, I would say that no man has ever lifted me over ditches or given me the best of place anywhere. And in the words of Sojourner, ain't I a woman? Now, I wrote a poem called About Your Mama. 2 warning shots in the air. 2 Southern University students fell to the earth, I know not where or why. But if I cared, I'd ask, who is the mother of the white man who shot that young black student? Who murdered that young black mind? Who is the daughter and son who called daddy policeman? I'd ask, who is the wife of the policeman? Whose lover holds the gun that kills teenage blacks? With questions like that, some murderer would no longer have a woman around to support his cause. 'Cause I just wouldn't feed meat to a would-be beast. I'd raise him a vegetarian, a peaceful man. At least so he can not mistake my children at school as something to be killed and eaten. Oh yeah, look how you gobble the news of dead black students, then cross your lovely ladylike knee and order dessert. Yes, maybe you, womb man, is who done it. Maybe you, womb man, are the thing I must change, because you gave birth to that 2-legged mange, to every 2-legged thing walking this earth. You gave birth. Check yourself, woman. What are you worth? If you no longer determine the quality of birth and peace, the hows, the whys, and the mating calls, listen. And you tell every brother, don't worry about the proper and the improp her. Prop her up and look at her eyes, not her thighs, at her mind, not her kind. See if she has something hidden at home, something half human. It drinks beer at night with the boys and at daybreak makes noise killing black boys. And girls, there are no exceptions to this rule. You are the teachers of this earth school. What is it you have at home supporting you? Did he get a raise when he shot those 2? A medal saying sharpshooter? Did you buy him a gun when he was 1? Did you laugh when he said, bang, you're dead? Did you rub that nigger into his head? Is nigger his spook in the dark? I am stark, raving mad when I realize someone's dad killed those 2 at Southern U. And you? Are you his mama? Check and see what you got at home. And girls, there are no exceptions to this rule.
Now, Gloria Steinem, one of a number of well-known feminists in the audience, who was asked to speak. We lost her first few words. She was saying that a reporter had called her that morning to inquire about the bad image a conference essentially organized by lesbians might have on the feminist movement.
The woman, I'm afraid, who was asking the questions was talking about image. You know, wasn't it true that lesbians were messing up the image of the women's movement? And I said, well, you know, it's not a public relations movement. I mean, and she said, well, wasn't it true that lesbians had dominated the march this year, and so it wasn't very successful. And I said, well, straight women have been fucking up marches for years, you know. What? Everybody should have a turn fucking up. And, I mean, I don't know. It's maybe the last tyranny, the final tyranny is to have to be responsible all the time. But finally, she got to the other end of the spectrum and started to talk about lesbian chauvinism. Now, I've had occasional qualms about lesbian chauvinism because it excludes me. I mean, you know, that which really says that only lesbians can be feminists. It excludes me, and it makes me feel rotten. But what is more serious, I think, is that it accepts the male definitions of sex as conquering. And I think really we shouldn't accept the male definition of anything. We really have to rethink all of those definitions. But she was essentially saying, I don't mean to put her down. I don't remember her name. She was probably quite a nice person in just some stage of development that we're all in. But she seemed to feel that somehow that it sort of balanced out, you know, that there was lesbian chauvinism on the one hand and there was the oppression of lesbians by straight women on the other. And then everybody is in between. I think it's absolutely clear that lesbian chauvinism is nowhere near as harmful and painful and prevalent as oppression of lesbian women by straight women. It's ridiculous to equate them. It really seems to me one is a reaction to the other. That is, that lesbian chauvinism is a reaction to pain and to hurt. And we have to, it makes no more sense to say that black separatism is equal to white separatism, because the one is a reaction to a pre-existing incredible humiliation and injustice. So, though, you know, we're all going to have different groups and have our own interests to work on, I hope that we can make institutions that are for women alone and support women, and that we can support each other as sisters. And thank you for, I don't know, thank you for not shouting that, you know, what's this person whose name shows up in the press doing on the stage. I really appreciate that.
Yeah,
That was Gloria Steinem. You've been listening to a portion of the proceedings of the Lesbian Feminist Dialogue held at Columbia University on December 16, 1972. The conference was recorded by Martha Shelley and Manya La Bruja and edited by myself, Nanette Raynon.